Christopher Nolan, the master of making films 2 hours longer than most people this day and age have the attention span for. Yet despite all this, he manages to capture audiences worldwide with his beautifully creative storytelling, emotional depth with his characters, gorgeous set design, and stunning cinematography. There's hardly ever a single film that this guy has made that the world hasn't hated yet, until recently with his newest film, The Odyssey. I've never seen moviegoers so divided on a big release since Suicide Squad in 2016. Objectively though, it's just a mediocre action film, borrowing from other action films that clearly are much better than this one. With The Odyssey, however, it's anything but mediocre. If anything, it probably has a big staple in Greek mythological films that haven't been done before, and I admire it for what that is. Yeah, I'm just gonna come out and say it, I actually really like this movie, despite all the controversies in terms of the casting. Speaking of which, that seems to be related to why people hate this film, which ironically is also a common issue in this industry. Mostly surrounding from the casting, with actors being casted, such as Lupita Nyong'o as being Helen of Troy, not as accurate as it's supposed to be, but when has Hollywood ever been historically accurate? But I think that's probably one of the biggest things that stands out, and unfortunately distracts people from watching the film. And then there's also Travis Scott as the Bard. I think there's an Indian guy as well. He's like Matt Damon's right-hand man in the film. I can see how it can be big distractions. I'll be honest though, I don't know if it's worth hating the entire film over. If you recognize examples such as like The Little Mermaid, How to Train Your Dragon, and Harry Potter, those are 3 characters that are casted as the opposite race as the initial character is supposed to look like. But those 3 examples are of pieces of media that nobody really asked for and nobody really requested in the space of wide releases. But when it comes to The Odyssey, everyone's been hankering for this. So despite that casting, I think it would still be worth watching because, well, it's a Christopher Nolan movie. Like, who cares how inaccurate it is at that point? I mean, I'm not saying that they should continue. I'm saying there should be some form of an exception, just a tiny bit. If it does continue, then that obviously is a problem. In fact, there's a right-winger blogger named Matt Walsh, according to this article, saying that apparently Christopher Nolan was actually fearful against some DEI program that kind of forced him to cast Nyong'o as Helen of Troy, probably because they threatened his job or whatever if he didn't comply, which kind of sucks. Honestly, at this point, I think Christopher Nolan is way too good of a filmmaker to work for these assholes anyway. He should probably work independently. He's way too good. That probably would force him to lower his standards of what he's already doing right now on larger scales, like especially when it comes to set building and making it seem as practical as possible, which this film is worth seeing on its own. And it sucks to know that he was threatened to that just because they wanted a black person in the movie that shouldn't have been casted there. Probably could have been casted elsewhere. I'm not saying there shouldn't be black people in it, but there should be casted elsewhere. If you see the movie Gladiator, there are black people in there, but they come from a different region of that sort of time period. But it doesn't make sense in terms of the casting here, as well as the other 3 examples I mentioned. As far as Greek mythology films go, they haven't had the best track record. You might get maybe a few films here and there that have a good amount of popularity as well as greatness towards them, some lesser known than others, but for the most part they've been total garbage. There's never been a single Greek mythological film related topic that has ever been done justice, and The Odyssey is probably the one that's come closest to that despite all these controversies. And honestly, even with those controversies, I think it's still worth watching just on its own. And it sucks to know that because of those controversies, it's going to be completely tainted from actually being its absolute best, and I hate that it's become a victim of that. I mean, I would much rather it be historically accurate, just at least to keep audiences from being distracted from what the film is supposed to be, or at least what Christopher Nolan intended it to be. I personally think it should still be celebrated on a spectacle alone. I mean, just look at this film. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. Of course, I'm not saying it's better than Oppenheimer or Inception or any of his films that came before, but it's definitely worth seeing just for his filmmaking style. It's just so unique and so grand. It's like, it's hard to see this from any other filmmaker who's willing to go this far into making such a great length of spectacle. And on top of that, there's emotional depth with characters that you actually care about. Yes, even despite the casting, you care about some of these people. Of course, there are some characters you want to die because they're assholes, but there are some that you do like. Is that really worth boycotting because you see Travis Scott in the movie? I personally don't think so. Regardless, everyone's gonna have their opinion of this. I have mine, and this is what that is. If you're willing to stomach all those distractions from the film, I'd say just go watch it, just because you want to see a Chris Nolan movie.